In 332 BC, Alexander the Great launched a massive ground campaign to conquer the Persian Empire, but almost immediately, his army ran into a strategic paradox. Alexander commanded tens of thousands of elite infantry and cavalry, but he possessed exactly 0 ships. This map illustrates the Persian capability. If Alexander marches his ground forces inland, the fleet can sail right behind his back and ravage a defenseless Greece. You cannot defeat the ancient world's greatest maritime empire using swords and spears. It presents a stark geometric problem. The enemy can strike anywhere along the coast, and a landlocked army cannot strike back. Alexander aimed to solve this by marching his army straight down the Mediterranean coastline, capturing every single Persian naval base from the land. Without safe harbors to dock and resupply, the fleet would have nowhere to exist. This systematic elimination of ports worked perfectly until the Greek army reached the city of Tyre in modern-day Lebanon. As we see in this diagram, Tyre was a massive fortress. It sat on an island a full half-mile offshore, surrounded entirely by deep ocean currents and stone walls that plunged straight down into the water. When Alexander asked to peacefully enter the city, the Tyrians essentially told him to get lost. They looked at the Greek army, saw 0 ships, and felt completely secure. Alexander couldn't simply bypass Tyre. Leaving an impregnable enemy stronghold intact would project weakness to the rest of the Persian Empire. But attacking an island fortress with foot soldiers was geographically impossible. So Alexander gave an extreme order. If the ocean was in his way, he would turn the ocean into land. He decided to literally build a bridge straight through the Mediterranean. His soldiers began constructing what is known as a mole, a solid land bridge. To get the materials, they dismantled the ruins of the old city of Tyre, located on the mainland, carrying stone and timber to the shoreline and throwing it directly into the surf. As the bridge stretched further out, the water grew deeper, drastically slowing progress. Worse, the engineers came within range of the city walls. The Tyrians began launching flaming arrows and heavy artillery down onto the exposed Greek workers. To protect his crews, Alexander constructed massive, multi-story wooden siege towers. He rolled these structures out to the very front edge of the bridge to lay down covering fire against the city walls. Knowing the Tyrians were firing incendiary weapons, the Greeks draped the entire exterior of these wooden towers in raw, heavy animal hides. The moisture in the fresh skins prevented the wood from catching fire. At this stage, the operation proved that heavy ground-based infrastructure could actually be pushed out into the ocean and weaponized. The Greeks were slowly closing the gap, but the Tyrians were brilliant defenders. They took an old transport ship and packed it to the brim with dry wood, highly flammable pitch, and sulfur. They set the entire vessel completely ablaze and slammed it directly into the front of the newly built bridge. The fire ship overwhelmed the wet animal hides, burning Alexander's towering siege engines completely to the ground. The burning rubble revealed a significant gap in the strategy. A stationary piece of infrastructure projecting out into the sea is completely exposed. Without friendly ships to protect the sides of the bridge, the Tyrians could strike it at will. He temporarily paused the construction. Leaving a portion of his army at the bridge, Alexander marched to nearby coastal cities he had already conquered, like Sidon and Cyprus, and confiscated their local fleets. The loss of his siege towers forced the land-based general to adapt his entire doctrine. Alexander returned to the island with an armada of over 200 confiscated warships. This massive new fleet immediately surrounded the island, trapping the Tyrian Navy inside their own harbors. With friendly ships finally acting as a shield along the flanks, the Greek engineers went back to work. They safely extended the stone pathway all the way across the deep water until it bumped against the island's stone walls. Alexander then combined his land and sea assets. He mounted heavy battering rams directly onto his newly acquired warships, sailing them right up to the fortifications to pound the city's stone defenses from the water. After 7 grueling months of iterative engineering, fire ships, and intense blockades, a section of the wall finally cracked open. Alexander's elite infantry poured through the breach, and the unconquerable city fell in a bloody climax. With Tyre taken, the Persians lost their final major base in the region. Their ships no longer had the infrastructure required to stay at sea. effectively dismantling their maritime control from the shoreline out. With dominance over the coastline, Alexander secured his supply lines. He could now safely march south to conquer Egypt and push deep into the Persian Empire without the threat of a naval counterattack. The Greeks faced a geographic obstacle that strictly forbade a land assault, but through relentless engineering and adaptation, they literally built their own path to victory.